Hello, everybody. We've got a very, very special guest with us today, and we're going to just talk a little bit more on the friendly and casual side. But we have with us Fabio, and he's the lead developer for A Song of Ice and Fire, the miniatures game. And for those who don't know you and don't know what you do you want to just kind of introduce really quickly and explain just what you do for A Song of Ice and Fire, the miniatures game?
Hey guys, it's great to be here. And in a nutshell, what I do is I keep everything checked and balanced. So not just number wise, but also I kind of keep an eye on how abilities interact and how these interactions might affect the game in a positive or negative manner.
Okay, sounds great. And then additionally, we have with us here Ilja. He's going to participate in this interview with us because we're talking about something that's kind of near and dear to his heart. So, Ilja, if you kind of want to introduce yourself and, tell us a little bit about how you got into the game and what's interesting to you that brings you into this conversation.
So my name is Ilja. I am part of the Tabletop Wardens. Maybe you know us from a couple of our German battle reports and podcasts. But we also do English content, as you can tell right now, for example. And for me personally, this is a very interesting interview because I am studying game development, not game development, but games programming. And part of that is also game design and game development. And for me, it's quite interesting to hear from a person who is working in the gaming industry how all those processes are going on behind the curtains, right? Because a lot of times it's quite difficult to get a hand on people who work there. And this is a great opportunity for me. So sorry if I mess up a couple of questions. maybe I'm rambling a little bit of nonsense here because I feel a little bit starstruck. But yeah, I'm very glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I think I guess we can get right into it. And Fabio, I really, really appreciate you coming here and talking to us. And a lot of this is for the community because we're kind of just curious, and I think at the end of the interview, we might end up finding out that the community matters a lot to you guys. Obviously, you make the game for the players, and I think we're going to find out how some of that process works and how you keep the community in mind when you do these things. So, just to kind of jump into it, we're not asking for any spoilers or asking for any teasers or anything like that about the upcoming update. But obviously, that's the talk of the community right now. The big changes that are coming, and you guys are kind of slowly trickling those in. That's something that Michael is doing. But what I'm curious about, from the community standpoint, when you guys do these balancing updates, when you do these kind of patches or however you want to call them, how much are you guys taking into consideration the community side? Are you looking at tournaments? Are you looking at what factions are being chosen mostly for those tournaments? Are you looking at some of the winning lists and looking for repetitive combos, repetitive builds, and things of this nature? Or do you do these balancing patches like internally, like your play testers do they constantly test and then they say, hey, we've seen this and maybe this is something that needs a little bit reworked? Just kind of tell us how that process works. Are you looking, basically the question is, are you looking internally or do you look at the community as well?
Well, I'd say there's probably a healthy mix of both, but that's a tricky question because although looking at communities in general and seeing what people are talking, it is really, really important. And we do take that we do take that a lot into consideration, but we at the same time do a lot of internal things, and we do rely and trust a lot on our playtesters as well, because we have a system, and as long as we stick to our guns, let's say, it's safer usually and more reliable than on just community feedback. Because once again, the community feedback, especially to see what the player perception of something is is really fundamental to us. But sometimes in those feedbacks, people might not be actually presenting the correct problem. And actually, by looking at those things, we can, at what people might be complaining or exalting, we're able to see the deeper roots of that through playtesting, and not only by myself, but along with playtesters. Yeah, so it's important to have a healthy mix of both. And I'd say that in general, we don't really take suggestions as well, like for fixes, because, sorry, this is a tricky question. Yeah, I'd say that in general, we might not take that many suggestions for fixes because we have a better view of the big picture. We're on top of a hill, and we can see very far off into the horizon of what the game holds. And sometimes what might be a good suggestion for right now is not really a good suggestion with all the other moving pieces. But feedback is always very appreciated, and we try to stock all the communities and everything that's going on as far as feasible, right? Because we have also other functions.
No, I think that's a perfect answer, and I think it's really good, and I think it's something that the community needs to consider as well. Is that you might see something and it might come out and it might seem really, really strong, but it's important to trust in you guys in the process, because obviously what's coming way down the line. And you said you guys are standing on a hill, whereas we're just kind of looking at what's presented to us. So I think it's really important that the community keep that in mind when you see something and it seems really strong. Just in general, you need to give that a little bit of time to settle and a little bit of time to digest. And you have to trust that you guys have done the due diligence of testing these things out, and it's all part of some kind of a plan that you guys have. So that's really encouraging to hear that you guys do listen and that you do give it some consideration. But obviously, at the end of the day, you guys just know more about what's coming than we do. So it's a really fair and a really good answer. So I guess the next question I'll ask, and then I'll let Ilja ask you a couple of questions that he has. We've seen factions somewhat released in pairs. So you had the Stark versus Lannister, and then the Night's Watch and the Free Folk kind of came out together, and then it was Targaryens and Baratheons came out together. And you've presented us with these almost opposite play styles, like the Starks are more of the control and more tanky and focus on panic damage, where the Starks are hyper aggressive. And then the Night's Watch is the elite, Free Folk is the horde. And then Targaryens and Baratheons are something similar to Stark and Lannister, just a little bit different design within those factions. Are you guys, do you guys look to play test those things as those pairs? Or are you largely considering everything that's released? So is it like, are you balancing like Baratheons in terms of Targaryens and Starks in terms of Lannisters, or do you look at the whole picture?
So there's an extent to which I can answer this, because I've only been at Coming Not for approximately 3 years, give or take. So I was not there in the earliest of design, right? And when they were trying to still make the game and the core rule set and so on. But of course, we talked to people, and I know that more than one faction was made from the get-go, because you kind of need that big picture, right? And although they can drastically change later, at least there was something there, like a bone structure of what they're supposed to do. But once you go to like minutiae and fine balancing, and like, should it be 7 or 8 attack dice at full ranks, then those things are done as as later part of the project, right? They're very important, but if you get stuck on that in the early concepts of design and development, then you won't actually evolve the unit into what it was supposed to be. So Design is looser than development. Like, how do I explain this? It's more flexible. Design is supposed to be more flexible than development in general. So when the Starks and Lannisters came out, they were not just balanced in their own little bubble. There were other things considered. But as the starter box, there was a high emphasis on, as the first starter box, right? There was a high emphasis on this should be very, very tight. And if you actually do play like with the original rules, with that box, I do believe it's balanced to like a featherweight, like to the weight of a feather. And the other factions came out. So like Free Folk and Night's Watch, I'm not sure why they were chosen as the next ones, but I do believe, and this is me speculating, right? In no official capacity am I saying this, but I do believe that it was sort of the theme as well to show that like it's not only great houses, we can make factions of other things as long as it's consistent to the lore and the flavor. And I think that was a really smart way of pitching the second wave of factions. And the fact that they were elite and horde is just a flavor coincidence in my mind. Like, because you wouldn't expect Free Folk to be an elite army, right? And Baratheons and Targaryens, I'd say almost the same thing. Although they sort of pair off, I think it was more that the way that they were launched that makes people want to compare them, and not necessarily that these were made as like little bubbles. Because when you're playing a miniatures game, it's different than a board game with expansions. When you're looking at a closed environment, miniature games are just really broad by definition. So if you only think of them as like little pairs, you're probably gonna shoot yourself in the foot in the future.
Okay, another really good answer. I'll go ahead and Ilja, if you want to ask the next couple of questions.
Of course. So Fabio, the next question is a little bit on a personal note. So if you don't want to answer it, I'm totally okay with that. But there's always one question I wanted to ask you, and that's, how did you get in the position of a game developer in terms of your career in the gaming industry? And what are, in your eyes, important requirements to become a game developer or playtester for this kind of game?
Okay, so I actually did college in marketing and advertising. So it has nothing to do with game design or development. After that, I started working with business intelligence and sales at Ubisoft. And that was just, I sent a curriculum and I was interviewed, and just standard process. And I worked at Ubisoft for 3 years in business intelligence, and that has, once again, nothing to do with game development. But I think that the most important thing is I found out that Comini was doing playtests in my city, and they were looking for wargamers. So I was a playtester for the early or mid stages of the Song of Ice and Fire game. Before it got launched, and they needed people to work on the Song of Ice and Fire project, because it's a game that Comini or not was invested in the long run, right? And I think 3 years later that shows. So I talked to them. We did an interview, and I already had a recommendation, right, from the current developers, or at the time of the game. So it's really, I think the best thing to do is like put your face out there and talk to people and go to conventions. There is a lot of studying as well that can help, but I did that on my own time. And I would say that it's really more important that you try to prototype games and make your own simple games first. And that will give you the confidence to do something more complex later. But even though that was not the path I took, I guess I was kind of lucky. But I'd say the most solid path is like go to conventions, talk to people, prototype games and show people your games. No one is going to just try to like steal your idea like Dick Dastardly or something. In general, people are really just want to give you good feedback. And I guess that's something like in a larger scope we see with the Song of Ice and Fire community, tying in with that first question. No one is going to take their time to talk on whatever medium it is about the game if they're not at least invested. And if people are invested in the game in any sort of way, you should listen to what they have to say, because that may factor in eventually.
Okay, that was very insightful. Thanks a lot. I didn't expect such a huge answer because, as I said before, it's a very personal question. So thanks a lot, Fabio. Maybe to follow up on this question, I was always interested because I'm coming from a video game development background. Have you ever considered or did you ever have some sort of plan for a form of public beta testing? Like, for example, releasing a print and play file of a component you are not quite sure about how you should balance it so that the community can participate in the overall development process?
So once again, this is, I would say, an educated guess based on my personal experience. So I wouldn't take this as a rule, and this might be feasible. I just maybe haven't found the right answer. But in general, public beta testing works much better in a digital medium, because people are just actually just playing the game, and you actually own all the information that's going through. So all the code is going back to you, and you find the problems, not really the people. When you're playing a tabletop game, really the quality of the feedback and how deep it goes makes a difference. So we need volume, but we also need quality. And I've seen sort of like situations where people, luckily not amongst my playtesters, right? But I've seen situations where people might try to, how do you say this? Taint reports to kind of push their own agenda. And so I really like keeping an eye on what's going on, and we need a certain level of control so things don't get out of hand. Also, once you make information public, people start making the assumptions of what your intents are, and that might botch what your true plans. So sometimes when people start assuming too many things, and we don't deliver what they were expecting, it might be even better or worse, but it just wasn't what they were expecting, then we have a problem as well. So public beta testing is interesting. The ones we did with the game modes were really useful, because we could kind of see the perception and what game modes were actually more popular, not just because of balance in general. So we can do some, it is possible, but it's just hard to filter the data.
Okay, that's fair. That sounds reasonable. I just was wondering because, as you said, you had actually released a couple of beta files in terms of game modes, right? But we haven't seen beta files for individual components. But yep, your points are fair. So I totally understand it.
So my next question, and this is not, again, this is not fishing for spoilers, so I'm not asking you to tell us what changes are coming or to what level. This is just general for the community, because I know that a lot of people that are playing, we've noticed that the current 1.6 meta, it kind of trends towards defensive units are a little bit less good than what they could be, because the focus right now seems to be on causing panic tests to make units crumble and make the units succumb. And it's all about alpha striking and eliminating units as quickly as possible, and then taking that and snowballing that to rather quickly win the game, or at least rather quickly make one opponent feel like they just don't have a chance anymore. So with some of the changes that you guys are making, and again, not asking for specifics, are you is the shift, because Michael's mentioned less killy, maybe how powerful is too powerful, is the shift going to be back to focus the game on using your brain, using positioning, using all of the elements of the game, outside of just tactics cards and setting up big combos, as is the idea to shift it back to more of a strategy and interactive game, as opposed to one person's just removing their models and then things just go super downhill quickly from there.
Well, you kind of put me in a corner here, because I'd say the game is already good and fun. Like,
Okay,
and
let me rephrase.
No, don't worry. I insist in answering, right? But if you can get something good and make it better, why not, right? And if we can coincide that with a physical product that was being launched that gave us the opportunity to make something that, like I said, it was already great, into something even better, why not risk it, right? Why not dream? And that's kind of the way it should be. I don't really believe that we're scrapping up a broken game. And honestly, I think that, yeah, we're not scrapping up a broken game, right? And this is something that we've been saying from the get-go. And honestly, like I said, we do read people's feedback, and I do believe that people agree. I hope people agree, and I think that's the feedback has been very positive in that sense.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely representative of the competitive community, or the friendly community. I'm not entirely representative of that, but I do make it a point to engage in both the friendly, casual scene as well as the competitive scene. And I'm by no means saying that the game is no fun, because in terms of competitive play, or playing a game that's each person has an equal chance, the game is in a very good state. So I'm by no means saying that the game is scrapped. I still believe, and always have believed, that this is the best mixture of a miniatures game that's very fair, very balanced, and every single person has a chance in their game right now, because it's about how you play more so than what you bring. So I hope my question didn't come off wrong in that regard.
Oh, no, not at all. I was also trying to put you in a corner there. So I'm sorry if I came off as too harsh.
Counter-Strike.
No, it's okay. No, I think we're good, and I think we're on the same page. So the next question that I have, and then I'll pass it to Ilja if he wants to follow up on any of my questions or ask any of his own. We've seen some bigger patches and some bigger updates. Not super big. Nothing major has changed, in the core system of the game has not changed, the core fundamentals. That with this latest patch, there are very few rulebook changes, which is really encouraging for the community, because that means that the bones of the game should remain intact. How often do you guys think is like a healthy rebalance, retweak? And when I say tweak, I'm saying adjusting one attack dice, maybe adjusting speed by 1 point, adjusting morale a little bit. How often do you guys see yourself giving consideration to those types of things? Would it be an annual thing, a biannual thing, or is it just something that you approach when you feel that it's necessary?
I'd say that we make changes when we have to. It's really that simple. If it's a small change that is that we have spotted, but it's not going to be game changing, it's not breaking anything, we might hold it a little bit until we have a couple of them, just so it's easier for people to assimilate, and there's not always like, oh, this week is changing, next week is changing. I don't think that's healthy, but I could never give you a time span, because it really depends, right? And I do believe that our current track record is pretty good. We don't make that many changes, and when we do, they're organized, but I don't want to flex.
No, it's not flexing. You've definitely done a great job. You've given us a game with just minimal changes, and they've been minimal tweaks, and obviously some people in the community are going to react one way or the other. That's unavoidable, but To be honest, yes. I'll pat you guys' ego. You've done a fantastic job so far, and I'm incredibly happy with everything that's happened with the game and the direction that the game continues to go. So,
well, thanks. You got me speechless here. Yeah, but it really just to make this extra clear, it is a team effort, right? And Michael is our overseer, right? And he keeps everything really in track. And we have a great team in all the other departments as well. Because the way I'm saying it I don't want to have it pass out that I'm doing everything by myself, because I'm definitely not, and it is a team effort.
yeah, I think you guys must have a really solid team, because yeah, as you've mentioned, everything's been really streamlined and really tidy, and the way you've approached the community, it's been really respectful, and it's been yeah, it's just been things that, whether it's coincidence or not, it seems to align with things that the larger community is asking for. And so it makes, at least me, it makes me believe that you guys do listen and consider, you know, your player base and your customers in some of your decisions. So it's definitely greatly appreciated. Did you have any follow-ups to what I was asking, where you wanted to go in that direction, or any other questions yourself, Ilja?
I have an additional question just on my own here. So, Fabio, how do you currently feel about the rule of thumb of 3 NCUs the game is now being played at? And do you want to introduce more mechanics and encourage list building with fewer NCUs? Or do you plan to tackle this issue in any, or I don't want to say issue, but the staple in any other form?
Well, I'd say that I wouldn't want to call it a rule of thumb in the first place, but I understand where your question is coming from. And we did address every single topic we felt needed addressing in different manners, right? And I don't know how far I can answer this question, because the having 3 NCUs was part of the design from the get-go. Not that everyone should only have 3 NCUs, right? But it should be an option. So I wouldn't say that we saw this as a problem, and that we should remove this as an option or anything like that. But as we brushed through everything, NCUs also also made the cut. we had to address them in whatever we thought was healthy or not. And once again, I don't believe that having 3 NCUs is not healthy. I believe that maybe if everyone only had 3 NCUs, that would be a big deal, but not everyone does. And yeah, not everyone does.
Yeah, okay, sounds great. The reason I was asking this question is because the new walder that you have showcased so far is kind of very interesting design choice, because he seems to encourage fewer NCU gameplay. Is that right? Was that the intent behind the new walder?
I'd say that Walder was already a very significant character, and his changes were obviously part of balancing changes and design concepts that we had to review. But the original, the originality in Walder was actually a flavor decision. Not only, right? Then we balance around it. But we were like, how else can Walder be represented on the battlefield? And we liked the idea of the late Walder Frey.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then we started tinkering, and there were like 20 versions of him with this, like, just by changing his name to late Walder Frey, we had to rethink everything. And this was the one, right? This was the one we really enjoyed. So I wouldn't say it's to incentivize less if NCUs. I'd say that in his specific case, yeah, maybe. But then as well, if you're always choosing Walder as your first points in no matter what army, then you should be paying the Walder price, you know? of making through the twins.
Okay, gotcha there. Thanks a lot for answering that one. So maybe an additional question here. During the game development process, do you actually take inspirations from other tabletop war games? I don't want to call names here, but let's say, for example, a game that starts with a W and ends with a 40K.
I'd say that if you've ever played any game in your life, it's already stuck in your brain in a way or another, right? And there is no new idea ever, right? No one has ever made a new idea. It just doesn't exist. Like, you can try to make a new game mechanic, but it's impossible. And eventually someone will, but if you want to make a good game, you always have to have reference and background. But to be very honest, I don't go into other games' rule sets and just start opening and seeing what I can copy and paste, because that doesn't work, right? In other games, you don't have tactics boards, right? And you don't have NCUs and etc. So it's really hard to transpose abilities and effects. But of course, there'll always be similarities, right? If you're playing a tabletop miniatures game, by definition, you have a tabletop and you have miniatures. So some things are going to coincide regardless.
Okay, yep, that makes sense. Curiously enough, I realized just a few weeks back that this game I was talking about just maybe gathered some inspiration from your game, Fabio and Michael's, in terms of cards and stuff like that. So that was quite surprising. But maybe one last question here on my part. So you guys mentioned that you are trying to streamline the game, and I personally think that one of the most hardest things to streamline right now, maybe perhaps, are the triggers on the cards. How do you feel about this? Because in a lot of cases we have, well, let's say a lot of different triggers, right? But they, in most cases, mean quite the same. So what was the process behind this streamlining decision?
So when we figured that we could and were going to have card packs, we said, okay, this is the moment, right? Because lots of these little differences were passing through. So that's, I'd say, that was one of our main focuses, and that's where we started everything, was by overhauling, not overhauling, but reviewing all the triggers and making them streamlined amongst themselves. And then after that, we went to do everything else. So it was first a streamlining pass, then a balance pass, then oh my God, let's make everything work and become as perfect as we can and want to make it. So you'll see, like I've said this before, I think, but my hopes for this update is that once people play, they're going to say like, huh, was that it? I feel like I'm playing the same game. And that should be the point, right? And so the triggers were something that we really wanted to address, and they have been addressed. And I really hope that we can have the same question a year from now.
Okay, sweet. Brett, if you have some questions left, go ahead.
We've mentioned that you don't have a specific time frame. It's an as-needed basis for any unit updates or any unit balances. Would that answer be the same for FAQs in erratas for questions that the community has, or is that going to be something where you wait until a lot of those questions come up and then print an FAQ?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a lot, but when we feel we have enough to make an FAQ, then we release one. It's also in a as needed basis. And I know that sometimes that can be a little frustrating because one or two questions you might have are stuck, but they'll eventually go through the pipeline and everything will be settled.
Okay, that's it from me, unless Ilja has anything else.
Oh no, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. I didn't expect to get so many answers in detail. So thanks a lot here, Fabio, for your time. And yeah, Brett, I think can close out this one.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's a very interesting conversation to have, and I think it's something that the community should be interested in. And I really appreciate you giving us your time. And as Ilja said, you've given us answers that exceeded what we were expecting to get. So it's been a real pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure as well, and I'm ready for the next one.
Okie doke. Well, we will be happy to have you anytime, and it's really nice to get that insight from the developer. And it sounds like you guys are really hard at work, just continuing to make what's already, in my opinion, the best tabletop miniatures game that's ever been created. And you just continue to push to make that better. And we appreciate the work that you do.
Thanks.
And Ilja, thanks for taking the time to join me on this interview and asking some of these questions and helping us get to know some of these processes and get to know the guys that create the game for us. So I really appreciate you as well.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot for having me again. This was a great opportunity for me personally. So I'm very glad that I had the chance to actually ask somebody who's working in the gaming industry on a couple of those. So yeah, thanks.
No, it was great. It's always good to have people ask you hard questions because it makes us think on our feet.
All right. Well, with that, I'll let you gentlemen get back to your evening. It's a little bit later for you than it is for me here. So once again, it's greatly appreciated, and we'll have a chat soon.